Happy holidays, all of that stuff. Welcome back to the show. Glad you're with us. I'm Garen Emig of Sellout Crowd. This is Mind Games. This is my podcast a weekly occurrence on the Sellout Crowd Network. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. This is one I'm really looking forward to for a lot of reasons. I'll get to the reasons and the guest in just a second, but first, business calls, duty calls, and I must thank, it's my honor to thank our sponsors, FireLakeJobs.com, Next Gen Roofing, 988, Oklahoma's mental health lifeline. That's important, especially during the holiday season. Folks, use it. It's there for a reason, and the holiday season can be rough on people. Please use it. Two Fellas Movers, Mid-First Bank, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, and of course, Oklahoma Ford Dealers. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of SUVs and trucks. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Ian Maule is with me. He's someone that if you've ever picked up a Tulsa World, well, not ever. If you picked up a Tulsa World between the years 2015 and 22, you didn't see his byline or his caption name next to his photos. You certainly saw his artwork, and it was artwork. I don't mind using that term. He was with me covering the Sooners most of that time. And he shot other heads of state and dignitaries and things and foods and comics and connoisseurs. But we brought him on Mind Games to dig into his time photographing Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, and the Oklahoma Sooners. I think you'll enjoy him. I do. And if you don't, there's your first New Year's resolution. It's a personality requirement that you need to undergo.
I'm only on one time, so if you don't like me, it's fine. Like you can just...
No, this guy is as genuine as they come. Ian, it is beautiful to see you, my friend. How are you?
I am well. It is my first kind of winter holiday out here. I live in Las Vegas now, so it's a little strange just to see the Strip doing Christmas stuff and everything like that. I had to. I'm photographing stuff at the Las Vegas Bowl this week, so I had to listen to a lot of Elvis yesterday. Because that is just very much what they try to pimp out and stuff here. So but things are good. Weird holiday season, obviously, with it being on the 23rd and stuff, with we're leading right up to it. So, but besides that, it's been great.
That's Utah versus Northwestern, right?
It's a thrilling game of a lot of just inside zone option. Yeah, it's just going to be fantastic. It's just going to be quarterbacks that you're like, oh, that's neat. They're going to go on to do very successful things outside of football, but yeah, I call it a good offensive lineman game. I'm sure Northwestern has the top rated guard in the country or something like that. They always seem to have that kind of thing. But no, yeah, I think that the feeling here was obviously, obviously you're happy with whatever it is. Utah's close, the fan base is always there. Yeah. Big Ten, when you get to that kind of section here, is always kind of odd. It's who you're going to pick because Northwestern and Purdue kind of probably have the same kind of footprint, same with Rutgers or something like that. I think the overwhelming kind of chatter that I had heard was possibly USC, just because of the USC of it all. I don't know if Oklahoma fans are familiar with USC or anything that's going on there, but they had a quarterback that used to play for Oklahoma.
I think it was a quarterback, yes.
Yeah. So
head coach might be familiar too.
Head coach, yeah.
You could have reconnected with Lincoln. I'm sure Lincoln would have been glad to see you again, Ian.
So that's always my odd thing with what I did with my job is that I spent a lot of personal one-on-one time, but I was physically next to people during these things, and my mom would always be so when I first started shooting for the World, I was covering Baker's first season, and my mom would be oh, Ian is friends with Baker Mayfield, which is no, that's saying when you go to a Thunder game you're friends with Chet because you happen to be in the same building breathing at the same time,
right?
So I photographed Baker for 3 years, and at his final Big 12 title game in Jerry World, they have suites that are field level, and he was waiting for his parents. He just got done running around the field and everything, and I was just standing there, and he's like, "Do I know you?" And I'm like, "Baker, I've photographed you for 3 years." And he's like, "Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Baker." And I'm like, "I'm Ian." And so the next time I photograph him on the field is him walking off after losing that heartbreaker in the Rose Bowl. And there was a part of me that's maybe you shouldn't know who I am. Because you make direct eye contact with me. And I was like,
yeah, it's you again. Great.
Well, it's also one of those things where I'm like, well, Baker, it's not really your fault that no one knows how to tackle. Or that your coach decided to run a couple of plays where there's 9 pitches behind the line of scrimmage to get a yard.
Yeah,
but it's fine.
Right.
It's fine. It's not a big deal.
So He is in Vegas now, and we those of us lucky enough to work with him at the World, the Tulsa World, for years, and it included me primarily, but also Eli Letterman, a colleague of mine at Sellout Crowd. He's our OU beat writer. We would always say, well, it's going to, our Stan's going to run out of the hourglass soon. We're not going to be so lucky forever. He is going to take a job at a bigger city in a bigger market and shoot bigger things, and that's what he's up to out in Las Vegas. But he was in our midst when we were lucky enough to have him those 8 years. Again, a lot of my time spent with this guy was with the Sooners on the beat, and it did start with Baker, didn't it? Baker Mayfield came in with you. I mean, for a while, you were sort of synonymous with each other because he did a lot of photogenic things. I think you've heard that.
Yeah, no, I could say that he's probably the best player to photograph, because like the way I would describe photographing Baker, so like my first game at the World, I'd never been to Oklahoma Stadium or anything like that. I went to school for photojournalism. I was familiar with sports. I'd covered a little bit of BYU because I was out in Provo. I'm not Mormon, which is always a fun story if anybody wants to contact me about like what it's like to live in Provo, not being Mormon. It's a hoot. There's so many varieties of milk you can drink. So we get to a point where like we're there, and like OU's and I had kind of known that OU. I had a friend in college who was an OU fan, and they weren't really that good. They were just kind of middling of the pack. It seemed like a little bit at that time, kind of the wheels were kind of spinning. And then I remember my editor was like, hey, they've got this new walk-on. He's probably going to suck. If his name is Baker, you should go photograph him. And they played Akron, and it's hard to evaluate anyone against Akron because it's Akron. Like right. They're fighting their own battles, and they're a MAC school, and you're playing OU and stuff like that.
Right.
But then they had went and played Tennessee, and I'd watched a little bit of that, and I was like, this guy can kind of play. And he also had a good supporting cast with Samaje and Sterling around him and stuff like that. And then I think it might have been like West Virginia at home that year, and I could be wrong about that. But there was it wasn't West Virginia because they were on the road. There was just about midway through the season when I came back, and I just told my editor, I'm like, I think this guy's really, really good. And he's like good in a college kind of way, which is just like in college around like with pros, like. I look at college sports, I'm always just like, you have to trust how responsible a 21-year-old can do a job, which is like, with most college athletes, it's a really well job. But like, I remember what I was like when I was 21, I just would sometimes just like not be able to do things I was supposed to. And like Baker was very good at just kind of like evaluating the field and doing those kind of things.
Right.
But what I liked the most about Baker was he was a fun guy that was like a wrestling heel, but like he never really did anything that was like super like morally wrong. Like he got arrested for being drunk in college, which if that was the case, then I should have a very long sentence from
right.
what I'm doing. Yeah.
Right.
So it was really easy to like kind of playfully hate Baker. It was this idea, he reminded me very much of like a Hulk Hogan and kind of stuff. Which was fun to photograph because he was someone that loved to run his mouth. He was somebody that had a chip on his shoulder.
Right.
I think OU had maybe fallen into a little slump, maybe nationally. And granted, I can't wait for people to be like, no, OU's been great forever.
They weren't great the year before Mayfield got there. And
exactly. And I think they needed a little bit of an edge. And I think he kind of brought back a little bit. Like in college, my second major was involved in a lot of like studying media trends and things like that. And one of the things I wrote about was 80s football, and Barry Switzer was a part of it. And I think you saw a little bit of that swagger come back with Baker. So he was a blast to shoot that way, man. And like the thing about, you kind of fed off that. And then it was just such a hard shift because you get someone like Kyler Murray, who is the most confident man I've ever met under 6 foot, probably over 6 foot. Because like where Baker would kind of let you know how good he is, Kyler would let you do it, but just like with a straight face. And it's almost like, there were a couple times where I thought Kyler was legitimately bored playing football at Oklahoma. He just looked that much better, which is shocking because he is a small guy. Like, and you just, when you can see someone that small just be that, like, not be scared or not react or just be confident in the ability of like, no, I'm not only going to outrun you, I'm going to embarrass you. It's like,
yeah,
God.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. You start with a quarterback, and it's cool when the sort of the leader of the band has a little personality to him, and certainly has a flair the way he plays. And you were lucky in the fact that you got Mayfield, then you got Murray, and then Jalen Hurts, and then Caleb Williams. Not to discount Spencer Rattler at all, but I sort of equate Rattler to COVID, which sort of means like he exists sort of in a mythical term. Because it seemed like football existed mythically in 2021.
COVID was super odd, and especially coming off of, you get Jalen Hurts, and God, who would have thought that, like, in that run of, 7 years, you could say that Jalen Hurts is possibly the second worst quarterback that OU has in that time period of everyone we've listed. The thing that stood out to me about Jalen Hurts was he looked so much like a 90s R&B star. He was wearing a lot of velvet, a lot of, like, earrings. He looked like somebody that, like, was going to cut an album that said, like, "Too Bad," like, on the front of, like, that's what I always saw with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just such a different shift because he was good, but he was not the same as Kyler. He was not the same as Baker. He was much more, it seemed like, a power runner. Obviously, we're seeing this in the NFL and stuff like that. And then a lot more of just, like, where Baker was playful and then Kyler was kind of, like, more quiet. He was just intense. He seemed like the most intense quarterback of that three in terms of his kind of demeanor on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, when Spencer shows up, again, it's COVID, it's weird. He has a really good season that year. He goes and they go to the Cotton Bowl. They play a good time. It's an odd year already. You're shooting from the stands and you're like, should we be doing this? Should anyone be doing this?
Right.
And then
sure,
you see Caleb come up. And I just remember thinking, I was like, it's got to end sometime, right? Like, they can't just keep getting first round draft pick quarterbacks. And then, like, Jalen was like a third round pick, but, like, he's probably going to win an MVP sometime in his career coming up, like, So it's this odd thing where it's like, I think that's what's so funny about the season with Spencer and Caleb that was kind of, quote unquote tumultuous, some people would say. It's like they lost 2 games and everyone was like, what's happened? It's like, I don't know, man. Like, you have 2 starting, like, I just imagine that happening and then, like, anyone else in the Big 12 being like, we'd love to have your problem. We'd love to have 2 starting quarterbacks. And I think that's what was so interesting covering my last season with Dylan. When I was there, which was like, Dylan is a good quarterback, and nothing against Dylan Gabriel and stuff, but we're talking about, like, Heisman winning quarterbacks, guys that are dynamic, and just how a little bit of the fan base was like, is Dylan the guy? And it's like, what do you mean is Dylan the guy? Like, he's a good, like, you've had nothing but great. That's the problem. Like, it was very much like a little bit of a spoiled fan base at the most important position. I mean, it's one thing to be like, wow, we've had the greatest offensive lineman, but, like, look how happy Iowa is with that. Like, they're not really that happy about it. So,
right. You referenced, Ian, something that, again, I think a lot of folks outside our world are confused by, and that is, it's not a necessarily a relational business we're in. It can't be, because we don't get to see these guys outside of, media opportunities, right? You don't get to see them outside of, or didn't get to see the Sooners in particular, for the sake of the show, outside those game days.
Yeah.
With a few exceptions, and we can talk about that before the program ends. But you don't. It's not like you're dapping anyone up, right? It on the field before the game. It's
no.
not. Yeah, it just wasn't like that. As many times as you shot Mayfield, he has to sort of refamiliarize himself with you after his last Big 12 championship game. It's not like you left behind when you left Tulsa. You left behind a relationship with Lincoln Riley or would have with Bob Stoops if he'd kept coaching. That just isn't allowed to happen, is what you're saying.
No, Lincoln personally called me and I told him he should go to USC. I was like, yeah, it's a good market. I think you do better in the Sunshine. LSU had contacted me and I was like, you're just not a Southern guy. Like, you just can't do it. No, I think that's what's so odd is that you have kind of this odd, intimate, I'm seeing possibly at that time their best or worst days of their lives, kind of things in terms of these situations. And you are seeing some of these players kind of grow up. And I think the thing that is so alarming for that is you can hear kind of the criticism that some of these people have towards players. And it's like, when you get to see them up front, like, I'm 32 right now. So I started shooting. I would have been 24 when I was shooting with the Sooners when I first started covering them, and just how, like, young those kids look. And then when you're on TV, especially with football, you can't really see them. They've got these, all the gear on and everything. And then when, like, someone takes off their helmet and you're like, oh my God, Orlando Brown's kind of got a baby face. Like, that's weird that this hulking mass of a man is a baby, things like that. And so, no, you don't have a really personal relationship with these guys and stuff. I mean, they kind of see you whatsoever, the way I shoot, and kind of I try to be as close as possible, and I'm trying to get those moments and stuff. I think they notice you. The only player I would say I had close to a relationship with was a guy named Isaiah Thomas. We did a feature on him at the Tulsa World.
That's right.
He went to Memorial. Memorial is a TPS school.
Sure.
They're not that good at football, but Isaiah was really good. And so we did this whole thing called Back to School, where we actually were at Memorial High School. They let us use the entire school. to kind of shoot like a back to school kind of thing, and he was there, and he was just really thankful, really cool guy, and everything. And then I'd seen him after the spring game, and he was like, "Hey man, you took my photo, thank you so much." And he was the only player I felt somewhat comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We near senior year, we would maybe do like a quick high five or something like that, because I also like try to ride that line of like, my job is to cover them, I don't want to be a fan. And like, unfortunately, in terms of football, people make mistakes and people don't make the right choices off the field as well too. And I never wanted to be seen as somebody who was like, I never wanted that to come back to bite me when it comes to objectivity. And also, like, as a journalist, I can tell you, if you were to look at my portfolio or look at my work, I have probably more photos of people being sad than being happy.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just an odd occurrence, like covering that. Like, you have to kind of have this connection with them. You actually kind of want to be kind of stay away from them in this kind of field, because you almost just want to blend in and just let things happen. I always thought it was so weird when I would see members of the media on the sideline and stuff, be like, "Yeah, man, like that guy's awesome," or like, "Oh, he's a really nice guy." And like, even here in Las Vegas, we were covering a preseason game, and someone was like, "Yeah, Jimmy and I are, like Jimmy's a really good guy." And I'm like, "Jimmy with the Garoppolo? That's what you're talking about? Like you and Jimmy do dinner, right? Like you guys are like." It's so odd how some people will jump into this industry and try to be like, "I'm going to attach myself to these people," and it's like, this is his job. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo and you like are like not close, and it's fine. I mean, which we should all be closer to Jimmy Garoppolo. He's an extremely handsome young man, or not even young anymore, like middle-aged. Like, that man is risking his brain when he could easily just male model. Like, he could just do that for the rest of his life and be fine. But now he's living the dream. He's just sitting on the bench when living in Vegas.
You said something interesting. You always do, but in particular, just a little bit ago, you're there for these guys' best moments and their worst. Did you ever? I think anyone who covers college athletes, and I know it's becoming less college by the week. With every court case, the NCAA loses and has to own up to the fact that it's not an amateur enterprise any longer. It is just an enterprise. But there's still 18, as Mike Gundy always refers to them in Stillwater, 18 to 22 to 23-year-olds. Was there ever a game, ever a point, ever a moment where you thought, I feel a little uneasy shooting this? I'm going to do it because it's my job, but I kind of wish I didn't have to.
I mean, obviously in a perfect world, everybody wins, but like, it's this odd situation of like, to answer your question, this may sound kind of harsh, but really no.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have photographed people on their worst days. Like, realistically, I have photographed, unfortunately, like murders and people dying. And so,
right.
With that, I'm sure the podcast would love to. Like, let's really just change the tone here. But no, once you photograph that, once you see people truly at their lowest, people who, I mean, I've had people that I photographed honestly say, with the look in their eyes that were like, I have no idea how to go on. If your worst day is losing the Rose Bowl, that's an awesome life. I would love to lose the Rose Bowl.
No doubt.
How cool would that be to lose the Rose Bowl, right? And this is what I tell a lot of parents in high schools when they go to the state championship game and I photograph if our team loses. And I had a couple people in the community when I worked in Tulsa be like, why did you photograph my son like that? Coaches get mad. And I was like, I never got a chance to lose the state championship game. I never got a chance to play in the state championship game. I never got a chance to go play in the semifinals or anything. What an awesome moment to have. And I know your kid feels bad about that right now, but like, it's like, the quote of loved and lost and to have never loved at all and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's amazing. I mean, so I don't really ever feel bad, because I think the only times I ever felt bad photographing maybe at the collegiate level was if it's a smaller, kind of lower, quote unquote, lower level sports, which are my favorites. Like in wrestling, you can easily tell when it's like, this last guy's probably time competing at this level in this way. He's not going to go to the Olympics. He's not going to be on the USA team. There's no real avenue after that. I think there's that. And I think if somebody gets hurt, I think that was the only time that it only really sucked. And it was mainly because of the structure of the NCAA. If you blew your knee out, I photographed, there was a Baylor quarterback who got his leg snapped in half, and Norman. Who was that? It was right around when they had Petty. Was it Stidham, maybe? Broke his leg?
I can't remember, man.
It was right around that time.
I remember Trevor Knight got really hurt against Baylor.
Yeah, so I never photographed Trevor. But
that was a year before you got there, right?
Yeah. Katy Perry told me explicitly not to photograph him. People love that, 14-year-old reference at this time. So no, I like he got his leg snapped in half, and it was bad. And I got the photo of it like breaking, and so there's a weird element of like, wow, this is a defining moment, but at the same time, like, I hope that kid's okay. Like that's the only time I ever felt kind of bad was when it was like an injury, because it's like I hope that this doesn't affect the way he lives the rest of his life, kind of thing. So
I think it was Stidham. Now that I think about it, because I remember. Yeah, I think we ran photos at the World, and it got to a point where, like, do we need to use that one any longer?
exactly, yeah,
Because I think everyone's got the idea. I think it might have been Stidham. If
yeah.
people assume that your favorite games are going to be the big ones, Rose Bowl, Orange Bowl, playoff semifinal, OU Texas, Bedlam, and you've covered, and in the time you shot the Sooners, I mean, it felt like they were all like 48-47, like last team with the ball wins, festivals. Is it that easy for you to say, yeah, those were my favorite games? Because sometimes all that does is bring on stress for those of us on deadline. It's not so you don't pivot right away to it wasn't as favorite as you think it might be. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so like so like the Rose Bowl is the only venue I've been to. I've been doing this since I was about 20 years old. So it's about 12 years now that I've been doing it for newspapers. So I don't really get dumbfounded as much or like starstruck. The Rose Bowl was the only building I'd been to where like I remember I walked out and it was like kind of cotton candy skies.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, damn, this is like football. Like
grass is always greener, sky is always bluer at the Rose Bowl.
I was like, I'm like, we're just gonna run wing T the entire time, right? let's do this the way that we were supposed to. And that was a great game. It's funny, I mean, not to offend any OU fans, but the playoff games were all kind of like not that competitive except for the Rose Bowl.
That's
so like,
right.
I remember like
facts
like,
are facts.
People, it was very exciting, and it would be like, boy, this is really exciting. And then you'd look up and be like, they lost by 3 touchdowns. Or in the case of LSU, they lost in the first quarter. Like it was just the LSU game. I just remember like texting my editor being like, do I have to come back in the second half? Like, and like that LSU team is the greatest team I've ever personally seen play. Like I think I could have played quarterback on that team and I would have won the national championship. Like, that's how good that team was.
Right.
Even if you take away the Heisman winner, Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
But I would say like some of my favorite games. I mean, I covered the Baker Mahomes game, in which I heard Patrick Mahomes say the craziest thing in his career, which is they had his stat line that was like 797 yards passing or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I feel like I could have done more. Where it's like, no, you couldn't, man. Like at that point, someone could tackle. Like at any point in time, you could have done something else. And so, no, I mean, they kind of blur together. Like the game where Jalen leads them back from Baylor. I just remember like, we're on deadline. So that's a crunch. That's kind of the ESPN game today. Right. And so I drop everything at half and I'm like, hey, is this good? Like, and where the paper at Tulsa didn't really have the settings to kind of be set up where like now I can send stuff a lot more live during the game. But I remember texting my editor and just being like, what can we use from the first half? And he's like, probably 1 photo. And so I had to drop and make sure that we got like 9 more photos in the paper because the game was completely different. What I think is funny, though, is when that stress hits and people kind of complain about it. And it's like, are you complaining about the job being good? Like,
no, I hear you. I hear you.
I can tell you the memory that I had the most, and unfortunately, I don't believe you were not there with me. You were up in Ames. Was when OU almost lost to Kansas, and this was before the Leipoldness of it all. So, like when Kansas beat OU this year, they were kind of. But this was a game where it was like I think KU had like 3 wins that year or 2 wins that year, and they were going to win. I was like texting the group chat they were all in, and I was like, they're going to burn Lawrence to the ground. Like, I'm not. I was dating somebody at the time, and I'm like, if KU wins, I'm not going to be home. I'm going to stay here. And I think like weird Roman law was going to be enacted, which is like whoever climbs the tallest building is the mayor of the city. Like, and then just to see that, like, and that was weird because again, like I'm more of a fan now of just like if something weird or cool happens. So like when Caleb just rips that ball out of his running back's hands and just runs the first down, I'm like, you can do that. And then, like, if you could do that, like, why haven't so many teams just enacted the reverse option play, which is just like Lamar just ripped the ball out of his hands and just
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I'm going to lay on one more moment for you to comment on and I'm going to bring us back to your boy Baker Mayfield. And I just want you to paint not so much paint the picture, play-by-play style, but what you have to do to put yourself in position to be there for the shot or the moment as a sports photographer. And you probably see where this is going. 2016 Ohio Stadium.
Yeah.
Mayfield wins, or Sooners win. Mayfield goes, finds a OU flag, and makes the run around Ohio Stadium, the horseshoe, and plants it at midfield. And if anyone calls up that moment on YouTube, they'll see you almost as much as they'll see Mayfield.
Yeah. If anyone's ever seen that, I am the guy in the blue and orange striped shirt. I thought that was a good look at the time.
But no, I mean, how did you? Number one, was it just serendipity, or did you put yourself in position to be essentially running alongside Mayfield as he reached the O at midfield up there in Columbus?
Yeah, I put myself in position because I just ran after Baker Mayfield. I mean, I think that's a lot of this thing, is that this job it can be really fun and can be awesome. It is a toll. It can be physical. I mean, I am running with Baker, and again, obviously people do a lot more physical intensive labor, and me complaining about oh, I had to go run with a quarterback in a big game sounds kind of whiny. But no, I see obviously the game at the score, I think they won by double digits, so I kind of knew that the game was going to be over and stuff. And so obviously the Baker was kind of the storyline going into the season, and it was going to kind of be the storyline carrying throughout the year. So I kept an eye on him and just started running, and he just kept running, and I'm just running with him, and he's running all around the stadium, and I realized that I need to work on cardio more, and I'm just trying to also shoot. And then so by the time you see him plant the flag, we have circumnavigated the stadium. We have covered every almost the outside. If we wanted to measure this for the city of Columbus, I think I can give you a good estimation of how wide that field is. Because he kept running around and photographing that. And I think that's a big part of this job, which is I had a professor in college that said the greatest zoom lens you can get is your legs. And I had a photographer that I really admired that was talking to me, and he said, if you don't want to be, if you stopped enjoying being there, then you should stop doing the job. And so just that moment of being there and running around, and I can tell you at the time, I was sweaty, I was tired, but it was just so cool to do that, and it became this kind of weird iconic thing, and then it just kept popping up. And this leads again to my mom, because my mom will be my mom, for a while when I was covering OU, would turn on OU games when she'd go out and be like, my son is there. And they would think, my dad's 6'7", so they'd think your son plays for Oklahoma, but they're no, he's a photographer. And everyone would be very disappointed, extremely disappointed, because it's oh, your son's not a football player. Your son just takes photos of it. And I'm yeah, that's just kind of what I do. But no, I think you just got to put yourself in there and doing it and being there, and just when we're getting done. And then, but that's why I love this job, is I get to be in that experience. Nothing against writers or anything, or but I wouldn't trade that moment, because I remember what it's like following and running. And I think that was the first time that I remember a player acknowledging me while shooting, because as he's running and doing that, and he kind of breaks to the field, Baker quickly kind of just said could you keep up? And I was no, I can't. At this point I couldn't. When he was breaking to the field, I kind of fell behind. But yeah, photographing all that. And then again, you're playing the deadline game. You're thinking, all right, how long do I stay with this moment? Do I bail? Do I get what I can? What if the defining thing? And there's been a lot of times where you miss those things. And I think you also just kind of have to have a little bit of hitter mentality, or, basketball player mentality of hey, you know what? Didn't make this one. Just go back out there. Just got to go again and, see what I can do.
Where'd you most like to shoot over those 8 years? Where did you really get a kick out of being? Because
I can tell you right now, and again, it feels like I'm ragging on OU and OSU. I'm not. I was very thankful to cover all those teams. Those stadiums suck to shoot in. There is no space behind the benches. You cannot move, and there's a lot of pageantry that goes around.
Right.
And so I think that stadium's really tough, and there's nothing you can do about it too.
Right.
I know that OU, when they are planning the expansion of Gaylord Memorial, they're not going to be oh, you know what? We're going to this photographer complained about space behind the bench.
Yeah, no, for sure. I hear you. No.
But I mean, a place that I loved shooting, let's see, Kansas State was always really interesting. It just seemed this odd. They played the Sooners pretty well every time I was there. There's an odd thing. They do one of the strangest things, which is they read the preamble of the Constitution before the game, which is always just wild to me. In case you didn't know that Kansas was in America, guess what? They're really going to hammer it down.
I like it because they serve chocolate and strawberry milk in the press
Oh
box.
my god,
So,
yeah. I could say that like the Cotton Bowl is always interesting. The Cotton Bowl is also just one of those places where just like for some reason it was always 99 degrees in October, and so like this year was a year I did not cover the Cotton Bowl. It was 65 or whatever,
yeah.
and I remember being just like disgusting and pink after games, just like gross, and have to like sit in a car to drive to get home from that after 4 days, like for that 4 hour drive or whatever. And I was like, and of course, the one year I'm not shooting it, it's like beautiful and it's nice. So,
Reasonable. Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, no, to be completely honest, like not to be sentimental or anything, my favorite places to shoot were with the road trips that involved you guys. Like those are my favorite things. Were just talking about you guys and talking with you guys and just kind of that and the things that happened around it. Lawrence, Kansas is by far, I will be comfortable saying this on the record, the best Big 12 city in the country or like in the conference, whether whoever just got added in. Lawrence is amazing. That's a cool place. Everyone should go to a game in Lawrence at one point in time. One of my biggest regrets with the world is I never photographed at Fog.
Yeah.
I really wanted to. I was really trying to push for it. They just never did. But yeah, I would say, I don't know, like a couple of the like non-conference road trips. I mean, we went to NRG. That was really kind of cool. NRG was cool just because I went to high school with a kid who was playing tight end for the Texans at the time. So it was kind of both like quote unquote we were working that day and like kind of it was
Right.
like I remember I saw him and I was like, hey CJ, he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I'm working here. And he's like, yeah, kind of I do too. Like kind of thing. Yeah.
You had I'm trying to think of brushes with NFL greatness. Speaking of the Texans, JJ Watt, right? Once.
Oh, JJ, that was, yeah. So I was not feeling well because of some choices I made the night before, and I thought I was going to throw up in front of JJ Watt and DeAndre Hopkins. I turned to JJ Watt when I like got done running down the field, and he was behind me, and I said, "You have to have identification to be on the sideline." And he like looked at me. Also, JJ Watt is like just the. It's strange that we're the same genetic makeup. You know what I mean? Like technically we're the same species, 99.9% of us, but JJ Watt is not human. He's just this gigantic hulking mass of people. And this was right in the prime of JJ Watt being a defensive nightmare.
Yeah, right.
And I like turned around and I was like, I was kidding. And he was like, obviously. And he went to Wisconsin. I had a lot of friends who went to Wisconsin. So I said, like, a lot of my friends are big fans. So, but you just run into that. I ran into Antonio Brown at a West Virginia game.
That's right. Yeah.
And he was wearing an all lavender suit. And I'm a Steelers fan. And I said, hey, man, like, go Steelers. And I was like, I like this. And the guy said, I like the suit or something. And he's like, yeah, I know I look good. Which was just kind of maybe just a preview of the rest of his life kind of thing.
Well, back then he could get away with it. That was I think peak Antonio Brown you ran into.
I think that was before the hit. No, it wasn't. It was after the hit. I think it was after the hit.
I just remember he was there for Hollywood, right?
Hollywood Brown, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I've ran into a lot of people that were really kind of interesting. Matthew McConaughey, the last OU Texas I covered, I sat next to Matthew McConaughey for a while, and that man just exudes charm.
Mm-hmm.
It is just like if you don't get it and you are lucky enough to see him in person, you'll get it. He's the only guy I know that can wear a cowboy hat like unironically, like, and that is not like a cowboy kind of thing. And just and the thing too is like he's an actual fan. Like he's not just somebody that's like, oh, I'm doing this. Like he loves that. Like he was super passionate. I think that was. Oh yeah, the last one I covered was the big shutout that Texas had.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah.
I think he shut him out, and he was ecstatic. I think I could have pitched him then, and he would have been like, "Let's greenlight it right now." Like I am on cloud nine. This is incredible. So
I had the same feeling meeting Will Ferrell at the OU USC national title game. It was the 04 season, which would have made it, I think, the 05 Orange Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of hope that when you actually have the encounter, that what you hear about the person is true. That the fandom is real. They're not just they're not just out seeking a spotlight. And B, that if you hear someone is actually a pretty reasonably cool dude, you'd like that to be the case. And it was with Farrell in 05, and it sounds like it was for you and McConaughey in 22.
Yeah, like the worst thing you want to know is that like the person you like admire or enjoy their work is just kind of a dick. Like you don't want that to happen. So you always are like it's kind of interesting to see that. one of the oddest things, it's not even a person, is my dad has been a Patriots fan since he grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts. So he's been a Patriots fan for his entire life when they were terrible.
Right.
And I was leaving the first time I covered at Kansas State, and Steve Grogan went to Kansas State.
Steve Grogan,
Yeah.
New England Patriots, 70s. Yep.
My parents got married because my dad was going to propose to my mom. And when he went to go ask my grandfather for permission, the Bears were playing the Patriots in the Super Bowl. And my grandfather said, if the Bears win, you can ask my daughter as soon as you want. But if they lose, you have to wait till next Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
But if the Patriots win, kind of thing. And so Steve Grogan not being a good quarterback in that game, I think that was him. It wasn't Tony Eason. But either way, I just sent this photo to my dad. It's like, did you know Steve Grogan went to Kansas State? And he just, a classic dad response of just neat. And I was like, cool. Awesome, Dad. That's cool. So,
you've shot some golf. Having worked in Tulsa, that was going to happen eventually, right? That you might get a major at Southern Hills. Anything is entertaining following either Tiger or Rory or anyone at Southern Hills around as you've got to follow Mayfield, Murray, and Hurts around at OU? Or was it a different kind of amazing?
Different kind of amazing. I love that golf is the last sport that you can smoke in and still be a professional athlete. Just let's just bring back ripping darts to all the sports. I think that'd be great. Tiger was the most mania I ever saw for a player. I missed Jimmer and BYU, but when I was working in Provo, I was looking at those photos, and it seemed like he was, I guess, a godly being in Provo, which I guess a white guy can be very easily there. So I would say that with Tiger, it was crazy. It was just like, and Tiger obviously is not the Tiger that he once was. And I think that was even, like, people just wanted to be a part of it just so they could tell like their kids or their grandkids, I once saw greatness perform, even if it wasn't great.
Right.
Rory was probably one of the nicest, most down-to-earth golfers, which has to be just a completely different stratosphere that you're living in. So that was really kind of interesting. But no, that whole, like, the major was just different. Golf is such a different animal where, like, football, you really feed off the energy of the crowd, and that's how I kind of shoot. I kind of, using the crowd and the energy, being like, okay, this is a big moment, I'm trying to, do that. With golf, it's almost like a little bit like a thriller or a horror movie where it's like, there's just like all this quiet and this anticipation. It feels very like Hitchcockian, where it's like you're waiting for the gunshot. And then, it's just odd too, because like I'm not a good golfer at all. I enjoy drinking and walking sometimes, but golfing is just like not going to be my thing. And it's just fascinating to see how many people are watching this, and then how those decisions are still being like talked about because it's so heightened, especially on that final day. Like when Mito pulled out his driver, you could just kind of feel in the crowd a little bit. I was maybe 200 yards down the fairway. When he hits that ball in the water, I am standing next to the water. The marshal was like, "Did you see where it went?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's in there." And I had this dream in my head. I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm the only photographer here." They had quartered it off because I was there beforehand. They're going to let me shoot. Mito's going to get in this water. He's going to get in the drink, and he's going to like go rip a shot, and he's going to go win this tournament. Let's do this. Like, I'm going to get this amazing shot. And like Mito looks at it, and he looks at me. And he like looks at his shoes, and then he says something, and they're like, "All right, he's just going to take a drop." And I remember being like, "Oh God, why? Like, let me have this, please." All I want is for you to make an interesting photo. I think that's where I'm at in my career now, is I don't cheer for teams as much. I cheer for photos.
Yeah.
So like if something's cool enough, I say let it happen. I mean, like, just that's cool. Like if somebody is an inch out of bounds, but they catch a pass on their finger, I'm like, call it a touchdown. Like, come on. Like, what are we doing here?
Is shooting the Raiders where you are in Vegas a lot different? Is shooting the NFL a lot different than shooting the Sooners in college football?
I mean, obviously you have the limitations with the NFL having a union, and it's just a lot less people kind of on the sidelines and stuff. It's the way it works. The Raiders are not that good. I think that's another thing too. I think the NFL is in a weird situation where it's like we know like the three good teams, then everyone else is just like. I mean, like as a Steelers fan, the chance that the fact that we could technically make the playoffs is an anomaly and a travesty. So I would say that, it's different. The energy is really different. Raiders are really interesting here in Vegas. I feel like from the very small amount of time that have been in Vegas that people are very thankful that they have the team, but the response to the Golden Knights and the Aces are so different because I feel like not only have they been hyper successful, but it feels like it's theirs. Like the Raiders moved, and so a lot of these fans are still coming from Oakland and like the LA area, like to come cheer them on. And like with the Knights, that's all Vegas born and bred. You're not having a lot of transplant fans for the Vegas Knights, and same with the Aces. And so I think that there is just a little bit of that energy, and the owners have like acknowledged that. I covered the Vikings. There was more Vikings fans, it felt like, than Raiders fans. You know, which makes sense. This is what this city is. It is a destination for most people. Who would you rather be in December, Minneapolis or Las Vegas? One of them will kill you with snow, and the other one will kill you with a good time. So I think that's kind of the attitude here and stuff too. So it would have been really fascinating to see, you know, supposedly NBA is coming here. I think that's going to be a foregone conclusion. How like the created for Vegas is going to respond and kind of given to Vegas kind of thing, which is why like the A's move kind of questions me a little bit. I understand all the dynamics and the financials, and you know, those poor billionaires just need to make more money. God forbid. So you know, owning a baseball team is a struggle and not a gift that every 8-year-old boy dreams of, right? So I think it's interesting. Like, I understand that if you want to move the team from Oakland or if you want to move it or something like, and if you want to invest in Vegas, that's cool. But like, I feel like if you're going to, and because Vegas now is kind of become the floodgates and probably like fastest growing sports market, wouldn't you want to just set something original here? And that's what I would really be hoping for. So if anyone's interested about the Vegas dynamics, sports dynamics here in the city, here on this Oklahoma-based podcast, you know, reach out. It's cool.
Yeah, very cool. You know this already, but I want to share it with listeners/viewers anyway. My favorite sports shot of yours happened because I was standing next to you when you took it. It was of the OU Auburn, in the OU Auburn WCWS series. Play at the plate involving Kelsey Arnold. She was safe. I think it was during that like 7-run inning that OU put on Auburn in game 2. I think they ended up losing the game.
They lose the game. Oh, I know they lose the game. So
they lost the game, ended up winning the series in game 3, but didn't look like they were going to lose the time you took the shot. Kelsey Arnold on a squeeze, I think it was a squeeze bunt, slides home head first, contorting her body to the left of home plate from where you were standing, which was next to me, which was on the roof of the stadium, like directly behind home plate. The catcher for Auburn is to the right of home plate, contorting her body in an attempt to tag Arnold.
Yeah.
And it didn't work, but the effort was still sublime. The picture was coup de grace.
Yeah, I feel like this job is preparation for luck. So, you know, like the way this would work is just a quick backstory. You only have so much sunlight that's going to hit that plate for a certain amount of time. I have been talking to you about this. I think this was the second World Series I had covered OU in. And so I was like, no, maybe it was the second. So I was like, hey, you know this. And one of the Oklahoman photographers, Nate Billings, had told me that you could get to the roof of the stadium by climbing up this ladder that was in the middle of a concession stand that was like covered in like grease from the Reagan administration, which is my favorite way to shoot. I always like shooting in these kind of oddly dangerous little bit situations and stuff. So you'd climb up and then you'd go through like an attic and you'd climb again. And I was telling you about it and you're like, can I join you? And I was like, yeah, I need someone to actually lift my camera up. Like my 300, if you could do that, that'd be great. So we go to do that and we're sitting there and back at the old USA Stadium, I think that's what it's called. Before they did the redesign, you could just set cameras up there. ESPN had not bought the rights to it. And you could just sit there and there'd always be some workers there and stuff. And like where you are, like if they hit a foul ball that went straight up, like it could hit you on the roof kind of thing. And so you have to play this weird guessing game of not only do I have to, the moment has to happen, but it has to happen while I'm here. And the moment also has to happen while the light is nice. And so OU's kind of putting up some runs. There's a runner on third. And in the back of your head, you're like, okay, third base isn't really the best place for that runner to be. Because if it's a pass ball, then that can be the way they can score to slide. But 9 times out of 10, they're going to score standing up, which is not that exciting.
Yeah.
But then, like, what feels like a weird, like, matrix slowing down time, like, I heard the third baseman, I think, from Auburn yell squeeze. And I'm like, oh, that would be great. And then I see the batter bunt. And I'm like, oh, that'd be even better if she could lay down a good bunt. She lays down the bunt, and I see, like, dirt pop up. So I'm like, it hit the ground, so it's going to at least not be caught.
Right.
And I'm like, man, it would be crazy if she slid. And then, like, this is all happening in, like, 3 seconds, and you just see the slide. And then I knew it's also that moment of like, did I not mess this up? Like I saw a flash of bright yellow. So I'm like, oh, the ball's in the shot, which is really hard in those kind of in baseball and softball to get the ball also kind of clean.
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, I'm like, just please be in focus. Please be in focus. Like just for the love of God, be in focus. And I remember like I got it and you were next to me and I usually am not this guy when I get something, but I was like, I'm like dumbfounded. This is the image. Like, this is great. This might be the best image I've shot in a long, long, long time. So then Katie McInerney used to work at the page for the Tulsa World. She's now at the Boston Globe. She just got married to my best friend, Mark Cooper. Me and Katie have a tattoo. She's one of my favorite people in the entire world. I got in like a screaming match with Katie because like over text, because Katie's like, we can't run this photo of them scoring because they lost. Do you have anything of dejection? And it was like a game 1 that they lost or game 2 or something. So it wasn't like
game 2. Yeah, I remember that.
It was a game 2 because the day before I didn't get anything from up there. So it wasn't like the deciding game. They started chasing back. And I just remember texting Katie in all caps being like, this might be the best photo I've ever taken. Please run this. And we ran it big. And she like looked back on it and she's like, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, listen, she knows design. Katie, my time working with Katie at the World was amazing. She made my stuff look incredible.
Yeah, no doubt. She made all of us look good.
Hyper talented, incredibly talented human being. And I just remember like getting that photo, but yeah, like that's really cool. And what was cool and always I loved working with you and a lot of guys on the sports staff is you guys had a general curiosity in what made me tick. Like I've never had a reporter go up and like stand next to me to shoot in a way that wasn't just like, hey, can you photograph this guy? Like you did it in a way that was like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just want to experience. And that meant a lot because like I was young in my career and you were extremely talented and still, you were extremely talented. Not so much.
I lost it somewhere along the way.
Yeah, you lost it. No, you still are. And it's just one of those things where it felt nice to be like, wow, this guy wants to be a part of something and he wants to be a part of it. He doesn't want to be influencing it or deciding it. And you never tell that story in a way that's like, you tell it like as an observer, which means a lot because I feel like a lot of times, especially as a photographer, you can feel like the redheaded stepchild in a newsroom.
That's right.
And it's very easy for you to be like, oh no, I was up there and like I knew what was going to happen and make it a very I story, but you make it a very Ian story, which has an I in it, I guess. But no, you did it in a way and that meant a lot. That was really cool and stuff. And just to see that, but like that's my favorite thing about photography is when you're right and something forms together, and then the worst feeling is when that happens and you look down and you're like, shit, I messed this up. And then like there's that dread that every photographer's felt where it's like, why do I do this for a living? Why am I getting paid money to do this? So
here's the deal. You come in I've always looked at it this way in your profession, your work speaks for you. I mean, I can form words around quotes, right? And plays from games. I can sort of, bells and whistles, that kind of thing. You guys, your work is the shot, right? I mean, there's not, you can't dress up something that doesn't come out quite right. Just like you can't gussy up, or mud up something that looks perfect. It's the work. And so it leaves you in a position of being sort of anonymous, and it shouldn't be that way because as long as I worked with you, everything you and Mike Simons and Stephen Pingree and others who shot photos, Matt Bernard, all the years that I wrote columns and covered the Sooners for the Tulsa World, just enhanced what I did, right? And people need to understand that that's it. You're in the enhancement business, same as Katie was when she was our editor, right?
Yeah, but I think that like there's an anonymity behind that like photographers kind of support a little bit. There is a sense of like, my mom is. Now that I'm doing more national work, I'm doing a lot of work with like Getty and AP. My work is being pushed out a lot more. And so my mom will be like, you were featured in the San Francisco Chronicle. And I'm like, yeah, like it's kind of what my job was. My job was they didn't send anybody. So like I have to be here kind of thing. That's like what the AP's job is. But like, it means a lot saying that because I felt like for a long time, especially like you're doing this stuff and like you wonder, like, am I the only person that understands how good this photo is? Am I am I shooting, there's like a term for comedians of like a comedian's comedian kind of thing. Am I a photographer's photographer kind of thing? Is this the only, like, is this, but it meant a lot. One of the nicest things I can remember, and I'll be honest, when I left Tulsa, that was tough, was a lot of the high school families. There was a woman named Mary Liebert that I was shooting an FC Tulsa game and she started screaming. She's like, Ian. And I was like, who is it? Got my name. Oh, she's talking to me. And I thought like she was trying to like heckle me or something. And she
Right.
said, "You took a photo of my son saving a goal to beat Union in the state championship when he played for Jinx, and you got a photo of me and my daughter hugging him." And I have that photo framed in my office.
Wow.
And Mary and I texted had texted for a while, and she would be like, "Are you going to be at this?" Every time we'd see her at a Jinx game, she was like, she'd see me at a soccer game. She'd be like, "Oh, please." And it was really heartbreaking because I shot an FC Tulsa game after I'd been laid off. And she's like, "Are you going to come cover state, like the playoffs?" And I was like, "I was laid off." And she like sent me a message that was like, "I just sent a very aggressive voicemail to the Tulsa World about laying you off. How could they do that?" kind of thing. And I was like, "Listen, it's a financial decision.
Yeah.
Is what it is." But those are the moments that meant the most to me. I had a photo of a dad when Iowa State upset Oklahoma. There's always a little corner that's always like the visiting fans, and this dad is hugging his son and everything. And that dad reached out to me and was like, "You have no idea how cool this was that this photo that got picked up and saw." Because like, you know, everyone has that story. And I think that's why I enjoy sports, is just that like the lows are low, but again, it's still losing a game in the NFL or losing the Super Bowl kind of thing, you know? Which is like, that's a pretty high basement. And the highs are just incredible. And it just comes down to me, like, I don't know, like my parents drove me to practice. I remember when I pinned a kid in wrestling, or, you know, we won a game in football, how that made them feel and stuff. And as I get older and I've got, you know, younger cousins, my younger cousin just started wrestling, and you know, he's doing better than I thought he was going to be. It's his first year wrestling. Wrestling's a very tough sport to just jump into in high school, and he's doing okay with it. And I was like, that's awesome, man. Like, way to go. And just that pride and that joy. And that's what I've always wanted to kind of like bring out of that. So, yeah.
Well, this is a season. And the gift that Ian Maule gave his readers, Tulsa World readers, for 8 years was his photographs. And I mean that sincerely. This is not corny. It's not cheesy. It's real. And the gift I gave myself for this holiday season was having Ian on my show to talk about it. Something I've been meaning to do since we launched the forum. To be honest, I'm glad I got a chance to bring him on so that he can enlighten you guys as well as to what he's been about for a number of years. Continues to crank out great work in Las Vegas. I wish he was still here with us in Oklahoma, but we got to spread that gift, I guess, because that's the reason, the idea behind the season as well. Thanks to Jacqueline Musgrove for producing, as always. Michael Lane, our creative director, Michael Martin behind the scenes for his help, his work. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. We know that you don't have to do so. There are a lot of forums out there, a lot of podcasts, and a lot of written media outlets as well to digest every week that you donate time and energy to Sellout Crowd. That's a gift to us, and we appreciate it. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I think I'm off next week because I'm going to be at the, speaking of OU football in the postseason, I'm off at the Alamo Bowl watching the Sooners play Arizona, but we'll come back in 2 weeks. Do another show, have a little more fun together. In the meantime, stay warm, stay happy, and happy holidays to you all.